Shalom, everyone. I've made it. I've made it to a very specific destination that, I gotta say, has always been on my bucket list. A destination that I personally would say is sacred. And I do believe that I can use that term sacred because sacred simply means set apart. Set apart for a specific purpose. And this location is just that. It is sacred. It is set apart for a specific purpose. That purpose being to call us, United States citizens, but also to call all citizens of the whole world, to call us all to remember what the United States of America was always meant to be. To remember those lofty ideals, those founding ideals and visionary goals of what America was meant to be, and to call us to remember those wise, inspired, God-led men that were so instrumental in the establishing, in the shaping, in the molding, and the leading of the United States towards those lofty ideals, those visionary goals. True, we today have fallen very, very far. We have fallen very short of those lofty ideals. We, the apple, have fallen very far from the tree that our founding fathers planted. But for that reason specifically, this location is all the more important. This location is so extraordinarily important for this generation because it is sacred in the sense that it does call our minds back to remember what the United States was meant to be and what we as citizens also are meant to be. I am, of course, at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore of South Dakota. And while I've been here at this historic monument, this extraordinary location, learned some really fascinating information about it. The sculptor, the visionary man that could see what it was that he wanted carved into this mountain, he was a man by the name of Gutson Borglum, and he oversaw the project for 17 years, but he himself didn't actually witness its completion. He passed away after overseeing this work for 17 years, and it was his son that oversaw the completion of the work. But even still, Gutson Borglum's ultimate vision of Mount Rushmore was never actually realized. Certainly, what he envisioned was mostly realized on an epic, grand scale. But it was Borglum's vision that not just the faces of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln were to be chiseled into the granite face of this mountain, but he also wanted pretty much the midsection, the body, the torso on up to the head carved into the mountain as well. It's something that you can see just a little bit of when it comes to Washington, but for the other three, it's just not something that was ever realized. Other things that I've discovered about the actual work, the sculpting, the carving, the creating of this historic monument is that 90% of it was actually carved using dynamite. The vast majority of this monument was actually carved using dynamite. The workers, the sculptors, under the supervision of Borglum, became so precise and so proficient in their skill at using dynamite that they got down to the point where they could use just the exact right amount of dynamite to carve off just a little sliver here, a little break here when it came to the sculpting of these faces. It really wasn't until they got down to that final 10%, that polishing of the work, that finishing up of the work, that they started using the chisels, the hammers, the power drills, things like that. But yeah, 90% of this monument was actually carved using dynamite. Very, very cool. But he himself, once again, Borglum, Gutson Borglum, after 17 years, he passes away, and he never saw the completion of his grand vision. It was his son who oversaw its completion. So I'm here, and as I stand here looking up at the faces of these four great leaders of the United States of America, Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, Lincoln, I am both inspired and also deeply, deeply saddened. Inspired by who these men were, inspired by what they were able to accomplish, but also deeply saddened because, as I said before, the apple that we are has fallen so very far from the tree that these men, inspired and led by Almighty God, what these men were able to plant. That tree was meant to grow up into something extraordinary, something beautiful, and for a time, even for a great deal of time, it was that, or at least it became so very close to what these men envisioned. But today, the names and memories of these men and the others that stood with them, their names and their memories are mocked, ridiculed. These people are hated. They're hated for who they were, for the things that they believed in, for their belief in the Almighty God, for their belief in the Bible. Yes, as all founding fathers of the United States of America were Bible-believing, God-fearing men, hard-working, passionate, visionary men. And we come to this day and age with this entitlement generation, and our founding fathers are mocked and ridiculed and hated and despised. They're vilified, not just by the rising generation, but also vilified by those who now stand in the same positions of political power that these men stood in. They're vilified by politicians and corporate heads and the media, and it's our children being raised in the public education system, a public education system established centuries ago with the aim to teach the children the Bible, to teach them to read and write and to build their lives on that rock-solid foundation of the Bible. That public education system that has evolved into some twisted, perverse monstrosity. Our children are being raised in Satan's background to hate America, and to hate the men who established and molded America. I have prepared for you just a little information about these four great presidents, Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln. We'll see that now, and then after that is completed, we'll return for some concluding remarks. Enjoy. George Washington, born 1732, died 1799. George Washington, the man who put his life, his everything in the hands of Almighty God, whose passion, whose happiness, whose sole purpose was his nation and his countrymen, and the establishment of a government that was designed to ensure the happiness of his people. Quote, believing that a representative government, responsible at short periods of election, is that which produces the greatest sum of happiness to mankind, I feel it a duty to do no act which shall essentially impair that principle. End quote. Alone among the founders of the United States, George Washington earned the title Father of his Country in recognition of his leadership in the cause of American independence. Appointed commander of the Centennial Army in 1775, he molded a fighting force that won independence from Great Britain. In 1787, as president of the Constitutional Convention, he helped guide the deliberations to form a government that has now lasted more than 230 years. 2 years later, he was unanimously elected first President of the United States. Washington defined the presidency and helped develop the relationships among the three branches of government. He initiated precedents that successfully launched the new government on its course. He was inaugurated as first President of the United States at Federal Hall in New York City on April 30th of 1789. With one hand in the Bible and the other hand raised, he swore that solemn oath of office. It was Harry Lee who said concerning George Washington that he was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. Thomas Jefferson, born 1743, died 1826. A man of vision, a truly inspired man of the Almighty God. A man who wrote in 1776 of the Declaration of Independence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Thomas Jefferson was a political philosopher, architect, musician, book collector, scientist, horticulturalist, diplomat, inventor, and third President of the United States. As President, he had the foresight to purchase the vast Louisiana Territory, more than doubling the landmass of the United States, and opening the way for the country's westward expansion. With his strong beliefs in the rights of man, a government derived from the people, freedom of religion, and education available to all, Jefferson struck a chord for human liberty that still resounds today. In 1802, he said, quote, "We act not for ourselves, but for the whole human race. The event of our experiment is to show whether man can be trusted with self-government." Abraham Lincoln, born 1809, died by assassination 1865. The Great Emancipator. Upon Lincoln's election as president in 1860, 7 states of the Lower South seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. At his inauguration in March 1861, he pledged to do whatever was necessary to preserve the Union. The South responded by firing on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, April 12, 1861. Lincoln, in turn, issued the call for troops to put down the rebellion. The result was 4 years of bloody conflict. In January 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation to free slaves within the states in rebellion, thus raising the war to a higher moral plane. In January 1865, he secured congressional approval for the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery in the United States. The surrender of General Robert E. Lee in April 1865 showed Lincoln's resolve had preserved the Union. Abraham Lincoln, House Divided Speech, June 1858, quote, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Theodore Roosevelt, born 1858, died 1919. In my own mind, the thing that stands out about the man and President Theodore Roosevelt is that he was a firm believer in hard work, and believed that every citizen of the United States of America must be a hard worker. Quote, "The first requisite of a good citizen of this republic of ours is that he shall be able and willing to pull his own weight, that he shall not be a mere passenger." End quote. Energetic, positive, and extremely self-confident, Roosevelt possessed a firm understanding of power, politics, and the role America could play in the world. He changed the relationship between government and industry, established a strong policy of conservation, influenced the construction of the Panama Canal, which helped make the United States a world power, and even went on to engineer the peace treaty ending the Russo-Japanese War. And for this last action, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906. You know, there are a great many Christians, particularly Christians within what's known as the Hebrew Roots movement, that would look to Mount Rushmore as being a breaking of the second commandment of Almighty God. They would look at Mount Rushmore and say that it's an idol, it's an graven image. I personally think that's just a load of BS. I really, truly do. I do not look at Mount Rushmore in any way, shape, or form as being a breaking of the second commandment. Not at all. Context is everything. Context is absolutely everything. The context of the second commandment, that you shall not have any graven image, is that you are not creating images that you are worshiping, that you are bowing down to. That's the whole context. Context, everything. So crucial, so important to always, always remember. We're not worshiping this. We don't worship this in any way whatsoever. This is exactly what I said before. It is a reminder. It is here to call our minds and our hearts back to a remembrance of what America was always meant to be. That America was founded on the Bible. And let me tell you something about the Bible and about God. If there's one thing that the Bible and God is constantly, constantly saying, over and over repeating, is to remember, remember, remember. Specifically, to remember the commandments of Almighty God. To remember the commandments that God gave to us through Moses. Those lofty ideals, those visionary goals of what we, mankind, are meant to be. Those things that we are to aspire to. Remember those things. Remember Moses. Remember the Torah. Remember the commandments. Personally, I see Mount Rushmore in a very, very similar way. Just like the 10 Commandments of Almighty God were chiseled, if you will, by the finger of the Almighty into stone, here we have a representation of lofty ideals chiseled into stone that does the same thing, that is there to call our minds and our hearts back to remember those ideals, to remember who we were always meant to be, what we were meant to be. And so when I look at Mount Rushmore, I in no way whatsoever see a breaking of the commandments. I think that is just ridiculous. I genuinely think that is absolutely ridiculous. No, Mount Rushmore is not the breaking of the second commandment in any way. It is a sacred place, as I said before, yes, very sacred, as it is set apart for the purpose to help us remember, to remind us of who we were, to remind us of who we were always meant to be, and what we were always meant to be, and sadly, in this generation, also to remind us of just how far we have fallen. But it is my hope that I can learn from these wise men and these presidents of the United States, that I can look back at their example and I can follow in their footsteps, and I can do my part as a citizen of the United States of America to strive towards those lofty ideals and to help as many as I possibly can to help others strive towards those lofty ideals. That is my hope, and that's what I receive when I stand on these sacred grounds of Mount Rushmore, and I look up at those faces of great men that have been carved into this mountain. That's what I receive. That's what I get from this place. I do remember. I am reminded. My mind and my heart are called back to what America was, what America was always meant to be, and that hope that there will be many others that will be reminded and will, like me, will strive towards those lofty ideals set by great and inspired men of God. I'm Jake Hilton with the Sword of YeHoVaH Ministries, coming to you from Mount Rushmore of South Dakota. A very, very special, very incredible location. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and we'll be seeing you soon. Shalom to you all.